Here we have, ooh, carbon profile design. Oh, it looks like titanium. That is a Litespeed titanium, early 90s, I believe a 91, according to the customer. So it has the actual canny brake design, also a 1-inch headset, but they were able to figure that out with a carbon fork there. And here has a mixed bag of componentry. Obviously not from the original vintage, so we're gonna have some upgraded pieces here. And they have wheels, a carbon set, and a regular rim brake alloy set. So let's review putting some of these parts back onto this beautiful Litespeed after this. Welcome to I Know a Guy Bicycles.
Welcome to I Know a Guy Bicycles, hanging out with the guy. Hi, I'm Justin, the guy. Obviously, I have a garage shop. Taking scary out of used bikes one bike at a time.
If you like these videos, please like and subscribe. Welcome back to I Know a Guy Bicycles, hanging out with the guy on this old bike series. Today we have a gem of a titanium vintage. It's almost 30 years old, if not older. It's a Litespeed frame. Obviously, it had pretty much a whole bunch of upgraded parts on this guy. And this is one of those unique bikes that I just love working on because it has all sorts of historical little bits to it. Also, it has a hodgepodge of parts to it, which is not the greatest, but it's at least as decent componentry. So it's not really too much of a bear of trying to get things to work, but it's been kind of a gem taking this apart. Now it's the time to put the parts back on. So I'm going to go over a couple of the parts installation on this and a couple of features that had to be addressed on an older frame like this if you're going to do something like this yourself. So let's start this. This old bike, yeah, starts now. So let's dive into some of these parts. So what we got is a kind of a couple decade vintage worth of parts that we're looking at. Well, we have older Dura-Ace. This is a 9-speed double Dura-Ace shifter set, and comes with a Dura-Ace calipers. Those two are vintage. They're the same, I would say somewhere around about 95, 96-ish, around there. It also has Ultegra, which this is more of a 2004, 2005 Ultegra derailleur, and it's a 6600. So this is a 10-speed with a 9-speed. Okay, you can swap some 9-speed and 10-speed parts interchange. Rear derailleurs is one of them. Also the front chain rings on a crank set, which this is a newer Ultegra 10-speed crank, which is definitely late 2000s. So you got two decades worth of parts switching, but it does work with itself. The customer is going to get, he provided a new chain. We're going to do a cables and housing set on this guy that he pre-purchased from the Bontrager kits, which are similar to this guy here. And he also got a new chain and bar tape. So he brought in some of the parts. I'm still waiting for a couple cassettes he's going to drop off later to complete this, but I just wanted to feature a couple of these items which are very unique and something you really kind of consider. So let's start off. Let's just go on my bench here, left to right. So we got here these Dura-Ace shifters. Okay, these Dura-Ace shifters are kind of interesting. To switch out the derailleur cable, there's this plate with a screw. If you're looking at a used bike and you'll see these particular shifters, you want to make sure this plate is in place and intact, because if this plate is damaged, the shifter is no longer functional. It's one of those weird things, and don't shift it unless you have that cable already in there and ready to go and the plate back in, because it will it won't shift correctly. So this one's really, this particular vintage shifter has really like a clear notch to it. The newer ones have a little more of a smoother fluidness, but these particular ones, hey, 20 years old, 30 years old almost, still works pretty good. So that's kind of like a thing you want to make sure you're very mindful of that. And it's not just on the rear shifter, it's also included on the front shifter as well, those cover plates. So I've already ultrasonic cleaned these and lubed the internals. The rear derailleur I did blow apart, but we'll talk about the brakes first. This particular brake, since he is going to do, he has a set of carbon wheels and aluminum wheels. So what he'll have to do when he switches those wheels out is switch out the brake pads. The brake pads that are on this are for aluminum rim brake. You can't use these on carbon, so you have to have a specific carbon pad. But these are actually not too hard to switch out. There's this particular bolt in the back here of the brake. Once this is installed, it's actually not too hard. What I'm going to do is try to do the adjustments, and that just slides right out once you, this one has a little contaminants possibly, or I need to get a little bit further out. Try to make it easy as possible for the customer to switch these brake pads out as well as the wheels. He's getting two cassettes which match, so there's not going to be any distinction between those. So when I adjust the derailleurs for that, there we go. I'm going to clean up the inside here a little bit, but there's still plenty of material on this pad. You can see those lines that go through. So that's something that's pretty easy once it's on a bike, but I'll clean this out. And also it's a good idea to clean this out when you're switching out brake pads. So if you wore out a set, that material gets built up in there. And I want to put any kind of lube in there, but a cleaning agent, you can use, let's say, something light as a cleaner that doesn't actually leave a film. And that way, once it's cleaned out, and be mindful too, actually I need to clean the pad. These are right and left, and they'll have a little R and an L on these guys. So you want to make sure you put them in the correct one. So hopefully that's a little bit easier for them to slide in and out. And since he's switching out the wheels, while the wheels are out, this would be the time to get into those brake pads. So if you need extra leverage to pull them in and out, that'd be the time to do so. And the new brake pads, they usually come with an extra set of little screws on purpose because those little boogers get dropped and lost in the shop. So let's see if this other side is. Oh, the other side is way easier. So like so. So I'm going to be doing some interesting on those. He has the newer pedals there. He does have a trainer skier, so apparently this was a bike that was going the highway to nowhere on a trainer. I decided to talk him into doing another cassette. The chain that was originally on it was super stretched, so we're going to do new chains cassettes on that guy. And then the crankset. The other tidbit that was kind of tricky on this guy is he got a new bar for Christmas, but this one's a 31/8 bar with diameter here. And what he has is a 26/6. And the stem is no bueno to work with the new bar. So we'll have to go with a new stem. And also, since this guy is a 1-inch, it has to have the shim in place to convert it from 1 inch to 1.125". So we're actually modernizing this to a fact where you can use the carbon bar with a more relevant, more available stems to purchase if he wants to do so at a later time. So that kind of updates the front end of the bike. So for front to back, that's where we got there. He does have one of the older Dura-Ace. This is a 7700, which is the same vintage of the shifters and the brakes. No, is that a 7700 too? Yep, 7700. So this is also a 9-speed front derailleur. It's not a problem. And then we'll need to put these jockey pulleys back together. And after they've already been ultrasonic cleaned, so they're ready to go in that aspect. So let's take a look at that. Pardon the interruption, there is more. More you say? Push the more button. Push it. Push it. I dare you to push it. Once you push that button, you get more details about the video you are watching, in addition to all the tools that I use in the shop, as well as suggestion for improving your ride. In addition to help me provide advocacy in the cycling community, also links to other social media accounts as well as my website to find the products I actually sell and other insights in the industry. Other videos linked below. Extend your cycling experience here on YouTube. And now back to your original programming. All right, so we'll just move some of these out of the way. Shifters are set. You don't want to drop any of these on the floor because you'll be in a terrible hurt. I like to use Tri-Flow Superior Lube on any of the pivots and the pulleys on all these particular parts. So these are designed as an upper and a lower. And this is the lower here, and that's the upper. I have a different float to them. So we'll start with the top one. This top one has two little spacer or washers or seals. That's what I'm trying to say. And I like to put a little bit of lube on here. A lot of newer, like if they're new, usually put on dry, and there's probably somebody gonna say, you don't do that right. So put that comment below if you want, but I found if you put a little lube in here, that prevents them from squeaking and also gives that protected barrier. There's also this internal sleeve you gotta worry about too. That's where the pivot. So you're looking at bushings on parts. And then you get the cap on there on both sides. And since that's you make sure it's running smoothly. And on the back piece here, you get some tighter gloves. There we go. And sometimes these are directional, so you have to be mindful of that. And this is gonna go right into this guy here. I gotta find my, whoop. There you go. And I like to get a couple threads in on this guy. Not tight, just to hold its place, and I'll tighten it when I get the other one put in position. So we'll set that aside. This other one here actually has a bearing inside there, and as long as they're sealed, it's okay to go through the ultrasonic cleaner and there's nothing going to happen to them. And I like to take these jockey pulleys apart when doing ultrasonic cleaning because I get into all that grit and grime. I found that's been a little more effective. And this has flat plates. Fit in there. And then we put this guy, squeeze it like a sandwich. Whoop. Hopefully we don't lose any of those washers. Come on. Get that bolt in place. Double check, make sure all those washers are in place there before tightening. And then give that the snug. Then I tighten this a little bit more. And go back to here and tighten this all the way. Also, you want to use a Allen that is clean, not a ball end, because you want to be able to make sure those bolts are tight and you don't want to strip those bolts out. But there's not a lot of material in there for that Allen to fit in there. So you want it to be secure. So for me, what I like to do is put a drop of lube on all the pivots, around the cable holder, the barrel adjuster. Then I go on the back side here, get the top as well, what this does, and work it in. I sometimes like to put a little bit of grease on the spring to prevent any kind of rusting and so forth. And then double check that barrel adjuster, make sure it tightens in all the way. Then when I tighten it in before I install, I like to back it off a couple turns so I have that adjustment range when I put that cable in place, like so. That's how I prep the front or the rear derailleur. The front derailleur is a little bit easier. I just like to put some lube on the pivots. And since this is brazed on, I can't function it until it's actually installed. Another note though, there's this bolt right here that's into the construction of it. That bolt sometimes backs out, so you want to make sure that's tight. That's basically a pivot position. I found these back out a little bit, so you want to make sure those are in place. So front derailleur ready to go. For the brakes, that's something there. I like to clean up the brake pad by scuffing it with either a file or a sandpaper. That actually cleans the pad. As I clean the rims, so I want to clean the pads here too, so I'm not having any metal contaminants smashing into that clean rim space. Oop, since I took those out. So I'm gonna go vertical on this. So I clean those pads up. Then what I do is I put a little bit of lube on the pivots and also the barrel adjuster. And in addition to where the cable mount and the quick release lever. This is the quick release. Those are the areas that kind of get boogered up. And since I did ultrasonic clean, it'll pull out anything that's in there. So it's pretty dry. So even though it does have like kind of like a bushing in there, a little bit of light lube will definitely help it hold its place. And there's a little rubber in there. So that kind of refreshes the brakes so it's be at the best performance possible on that. Now the pedals I'll put a little bit of grease on the threads here when we install it. And then with the skewers, I like to put a little bit of grease in the pivot here so that cleans that out a little bit. And these were put in ultrasonic cleaner as well. And when I go to install this, I'll put a little bit liner of grease on this skewer shaft, like so. Reason being is Colorado's not so bad, but when you're looking at areas with high humidity, you definitely want to protect these parts from rusting, and these will rust. I've seen them. It's nasty. Then you do the same thing with the front. This does have a different front skewer that matches the wheel set. That one was designed or used for a trainer that mounts onto the trainer portion. So he probably has like a Cyclops or something like that. So these are all prepped and ready to go. And I'm not going to install these until I get the new cassette to install that. So that takes care of the drivetrain parts for the most part, except for the crank. The crank itself, we can grease this right now. I like to put a nice layer of grease on this before it goes into the bearings. That way it adds a barrier for waterproofing. I've seen some of these where it's all rusted and pitted on the inside, which is crazy insane. So, and you notice there's a little hole here, right there. We'll show you what that's all about. This side. Okay, so this is the left crank arm. This goes on this side, right? So that's where we're going to go. Slides right in. But I took the bolts out to clean it, and what you have here. Take these gloves off. You have these two bolts, and when you take these out, make sure you keep an eye on these washers so you don't lose them. And then you have this little hooky thingy. Yeah, that's the true definition hooky thingy. The hooky thingy, the hook goes towards the outside. So the crank arm goes onto the crank, just got grease on me, on the outside like this, and the hooky thingy goes towards the outside of the bike, right? So the idea of the hooky thingy has a little pin right here. That pin goes into this little hole. So if you have the crank in there, and once the crank goes in far enough, that little pin, boop, drops into this hole, which will tell you that you have enough compression on your bearings so you can actually tighten your bolts. And then when you tighten your bolts, these are anywhere between 12 to 14 Newton meters. So we're going to reassemble this. So you take it all apart and you're like, oh crap, how does it all go back? Well, just imagine the hooky thingy goes on the outside of the crank. So first, and these are not prepped, so you either use grease or anti-seize. Too much grease on there. Grease. And you need to slide this little booger in there, like so you can get that bolt to go through. Oop. Like that. And I believe that's a 5mm, just to tighten it down. You can see that hooky thing, he still wants to pop in and out. Don't have to tighten it too tight, just hold it in place. So now we got the hooky thingy in there. A little grease on the other bolt. all bolts. If it has Loctite on there, you don't grease it, but if it does, pretty much for cycle industry, you do put grease on all your bolts. And this is kind of tricky. You want this guy to be in place where it's kind of up so that little pin is not engaged, but not too far up so it's not holding. So the idea is when you tighten this down, you should be able to push that in to that hole. So just till it stops. All right, now our little hooky thingy is prepped and ready to go. Keep on getting grease all over this guy. This guy greasing my thumb. There we go. So now the crankset is prepped and ready to go. Another side note you want to know is this particular crankset has the bolts on the inside, so you would release those, the whole crank comes apart. The threads are pre-built into the outside outer ring. So that being said, these are proprietary chain rings. You can't really swap them out with other brands per se, unless they're specifically designed for the Altiger crank. In addition to, sometimes these are also Torx. They're not an Allen, so you'll need to use a torque bolt. In addition to, sometimes on all cranks, these little boogers will loosen up a little bit, and that will give you your creak sound. When you're cranking, you're like, geek, geek, geek. So quick check. If you have a creak in your crank, check your chainring bolts to make sure they're tight. If you tighten those guys down and the creak goes away, yeah, you don't have to crank up those earbuds while you're riding. Therefore, there's our parts prep. Oh, one last bit. I do take the cable stops off the frame, and while I have them off here, I do put a little bit of lube on the threads. So while you're riding, you can adjust these, and these do get boogered up, and like contaminants are not, stuck. And when you want to use them and you can't twist it, plus they're up against the frame, so it's really hard to get to it. So you want to have these as fluid as possible. So a little bit of light lube will definitely increase that. Way to go. Yeah, that's a lot of prep work, right? So yeah, that's what I do. A lot of the cleaning, get that grease out, the old gunk and dirt, ultrasonic cleaner, magic. I have videos on that if you want to review. Also, I pre-prep the parts, which I have videos on that too. And I pre-prep them, lube them, that kind of thing. It's hard to do on the frame, plus you don't want that lube to drip on different parts that you don't want that grease on. So if it's isolated on the bench, it's a little bit easier to control. Especially if you're taking those little micro screws out of the shifters. I did that over a paper towel on the bench really close because I've lost those little screws before, and you will never find it again. It'll hit the floor, you'll hear it, but it'll never be seen again. So yeah, those particular scary little screws, also for the nameplate ones, same thing, same kind of issue. So you want to make sure those are in a confined area where if those things do drop, you're not losing it. So the parts are prepped, ready to go. I'm going to put on as many as I can, but I'm going to review. I'm going to go from front to back on this guy. So we're going to go from the handlebars that we're installing, and then we're going to put on the front derailleur and the brakes and the crankset, and then I'm going to be waiting for that cassette and the derailleur. And the cassette will be installed on both wheels, and I'm not going to, well, I don't have a chain. Well, I do have the chain to install, but I don't know the length per se because I'm not sure what cassette range he has that he's bringing. So I will measure that after I receive that part, but I'll get the front and back pieces of this so far. Let's check out that stem and bar. Okay, here's the little boogers here. So this is the old one, 26.6, and then we have the new 31.8, and it will say, whoop, right there. Not always, and this is 42 centimeter, which is the matching, well, a little bit wider than what he had on there. It looks like he had a 40. So to get this close as possible, I have the stem, which is the S-Work stem, which I'm going to have to talk to him, see if this is something that he wants. If not, this is what I'm going to install for now. But this one has a 4-bolt pattern, and these do take up to, what was it, 5, I forget what it is, a 5 Newton meter. Usually a little stamped on there. So you got 4 bolts here. Let me get this. I'm going to pre-install this now and adjust it when he comes in to pick up the bike to be fitted. Oh. Okay, so keep in mind, stem has a down position or up position. What he had on there is up position, so I want to keep it at this position here. And don't put it on backwards. We're not writing backwards today, Justin. So put this here, and there'll be a little spacing or measurements or what have you where this guy goes back into place. And when you're installing these, you want an equal gap on both front and back. So this is usually done very lightly. I'm not going to torque these down by any means until I get it installed. Right now I'm just going to get it in position so the stem will hold its place. So I'm going to pull those angles so it's not dropping down by gravity. And you want to use a crossover zigzag pattern when you tighten these down. You need to tighten them not straight to 5 Newton millimeters each. You want to do like 2 and 3, then to 5. About 3 different rounds before you go to the full. So, gotta tighten this down. Then I'll flip it over, inspect, and see if it's pretty close to the same spacing. You don't want these rocking over. So the spacing on these on both sides, you want about the same. Reason being is that gives the washers and the bolt heads to hit equally, flush to the nameplate. Granted, it's a lower torques, but you don't want to put those bolts at a tension like so. And it's still a little loose, but the bolts are in there are snug. So we're ready to install the bars. All right, so keep in mind too, this stack height on a lot of these different stems might vary. So this guy actually goes down a little below the lip line of the steer tube. Well, I'm going to have to get a spacer to make sure either goes on top or below to make sure that is secure. I'm going to opt to be on top at this point. So you can see that there's like that lip. Reason being is you got to have that adjustment. This presses from the bottom down. But luckily for me, this particular stem, since this is a carbon steer tube, has a special plug that goes in there, and it already has a spacer. So hopefully that wedge piece kicks in, expands out, then I can adjust it. It's taking that pre-compresses the bars down or the stem down onto but there's still a little bit of wiggle. So these are kind of tricky because you got to make sure that plug is in there, wedge is in there good enough before it to go down on that. So that goes over. So I'm going to look for an extra spacer. All right, so I'm going to slide that guy out. Hopefully that's enough space. So if it isn't, I'll have to go search in my bins for a 1-inch spacer. This is 1 1/8 that goes over the top of the. There we go. It feels like it's snugging up. And this is something you can readjust at a later time too, which may need to be once the wheels are in there for adjustment. And back on the pinch bolts here too. You want to tighten these up equally, both top and bottom, not just smash one down, then smash the other one. Same kind of tension piece. So you want to tighten them equally up and down. I'm not going to tighten them all the way because I'll need to readjust this once I have the front wheel in there and everything else assembled. But from that perspective, you can do the old trick of, I'm going to put my little hip here, then I'm going to measure the front fork, and try to get the bike as level compared to the wheel dropouts. Dad taught me that back in the day. So that's how the bike's going to sit on the floor if you're going to, essentially you don't have wheels. So it's one way of checking it. So for this guy, I'm going to do quarter turns up, cross, up, over, cross, over. So I'm just doing quarter turns so they feel about equal in tension. So I'll do this here. And then visually inspect, make sure they're both still equal. Then I'll use the torques on that to make sure it's even. Now for the fun part of putting on the shifters. So what I found on these guys, you want to get your Allen in there, and you can adjust the band to loosen and tighten. Some leftover bar tape. Now I pre-taped them to where they fit on the other bars to do the closest position matching as possible. I think it was that bottom part right there. And I'll double check it too. Also for fitting purposes, if you're wanting your bike fitted to you and they're doing a tune-up on it, don't have them wrap the bars. Have them wrap the bars after the fitting, because those adjustments could be done and you want to have the bars wrapped prior to that. So give that a good little snug to hold its place. And you gotta be careful, these will start whipping around on you. So you don't want to be dinging or chipping your paint when it's in this position. And I'm going to do the other one here, or you can put a piece of towel or what have you to protect the frame. And these have like a tack to the side here to hold the band clamp in position. Try to give them equal. But these will be some adjustments once I get it all. I just need to get them placed so I can start putting on cables and housing, like so. Since I have those equalized, now I can mess with my delt. So starting with the front to back theme, or continuing with the front to back theme, I like to put a little grease on these back bolts. Reason being is there's a lot of contaminants get pushed in there, and I've always found there's always a good layer of gunk in there. So if you put a little bit of grease, that might prevent the gunk going in and kind of protect that. Going forward. And the front will have a longer post, the rear will have a shorter post. That's pretty easy to identify. Or the bolts need to be on the back side of the brake. Is the force of the rims going this direction, and you want the bolts to be on the back to secure it. If it's backwards, you're forcing that pad against these bolts, and if those give for some reason, you may lose a brake pad, which is not good. So you want to make sure you put those on correctly. If you find them backwards, go ahead and correct that. I've done that several times before, because sometimes people don't read the instructions when they're installing those. So since I have the front brake, I'm just going to keep the theme and just do the back brake. Same thing, we put a little layer of grease on that bolt. Continue, slide it in here, and then you can put that brake. Sometimes, you want to be careful it doesn't tap up against the frame. Sometimes you get lucky, I can just spin it tight. And I'm not putting a lot of torque on these yet because I'll be doing adjustments when I get the cables and housing in there, like so. There's the brakes. Onto the cranks. Okay, so the cranks are out, and this is the good time to really check those bearings of the bottom bracket because you really can't tell sometimes when the crank is on there while you're riding or just spinning it. What you want it to feel with these newer bearings, these are cartridge bearings that thread in. They want to be smooth, but you want to feel kind of not like spinny smooth, like smooth, but you feel like there's a grease in there, kind of slowing its roll. Reason being is with that grease is intact and it feels smooth, you're good. If it feels spinny or grindy, they're not good. Then you need to be replaced. These are not terribly expensive. So when you're in this stage, you might as well just swap them out if you need to, because afterwards it's kind of a pain. You do need specialty tools to take these off and on, so keep in mind of that. If you're doing it yourself and you don't have that specialty tool, I'm sure you can take this to your local shop and go, hey, here's my new bottom bracket, could you throw these in real quick? Or when you can, and ask for a price. It shouldn't be too terribly expensive to have them. Just pop them out and put them back in there for you. Or you can research and get the tool yourself. It's always good to have that on hand. Keep in mind, tightening is going backwards, like you're spinning backwards on both sides, and the loosening is pedaling forwards on both sides. One of these is a reverse thread. I'm not going to tell you which one. That's going to be for you to figure out. Okay, that pre-prepped grease crank, well, don't put it on the wrong side, right side is the crank on your right arm, right leg. That slides right through there. And some cranks out there will have different spacers and so forth. This one does not, but you want to be mindful when you take crank sets apart if there's any spacers on both sides that fit in there. And then this slides right over on the opposite direction. Remember that little hooky thing? It's there. And this is our adjuster nut from Shimano. Then you get a Park tool similar to this. I suggest getting the one with the hook. That just makes life a lot easier. It's only a few bucks more, not terribly. Try to do this so you can actually see it. Get that tool in there. You tighten this down so it engages, right? Then you keep on tightening it until it feels secure. Now you want to push your little hooky thing and keep tightening it by a little bit until it pops into that little hole that's in the spindle of the right side of the crank. That, when it pops down, that means it's engaged enough where it's in place. And it doesn't have to be super spinny because, like I mentioned, you got the grease in there to slow it down, but you want it smooth. But once you get cranking, you're going to be just fine. All right, now there's two bolts on both sides. You want to tighten these up till they'll hit flush first, equally. What I like to do is maybe like a quarter to a half turn, equally on both sides. So you're distributing the pressure equally as you're tightening this down. So I feel pretty confident. Then torque wrench. This one's going to be at 10 to 12 newton meters, so I'm going to start off with 5, or actually 6, and I'm going to torque it down to 6, which it's at already, so I'll continue to keep going up. So 8. And don't go past the notch on the torque. So, and I'm going to go up to 11. Make sure the tool's in there flush. I felt that bolt give a little. There you go. Just double check it. There we go. We're good to go. Then with all torque tools, you want to set it back to 0. So it doesn't pre-press that torque spring. So there's our crank set. And while we're down here, we're going to put in the cable guide. Like the lube, again, this is a contaminant area, right? This had a whole bunch of gunk underneath it, so I cleaned that all out. Clean this. Also gives me a time to put a little bit of line of lube on where the cables slide on. Let's see if I can do this without too much trouble. And this one's threaded, the frame is, so this little bolt will slide in here. Why are you being a booger? Or is it a little bit higher up? Maybe it was higher up on this one. Oh, see? That's what happens. So I put these kind of rubber mats that I got from Harbor Freight underneath for, well, initially for comfort, but it really slows that bolt down when it hits the floor. It gives me an opportunity to see where it's going versus a hard concrete floor where, ping, it's gone. And it goes underneath some boxes, and when you're cleaning your shop out in January, a good vacuum, all of a sudden you're like, oh, there that is. There we go. So the cable goes to the front derailleur here. This one goes to the rear. All set. Onto the front derailleur. So this is what they call a braze-on. This is a permanent mount braze-on. Then you'll have one as a band clamp for some frames. This one was welded in place. So you take the braze-on bolt out like so. Tighten her down. They usually add a little sticker when they're new. So it's 2 millimeters above the teeth. So you're going to just line that up. Then slightly tighten it. Then you can adjust the back and forth here. You want to pretty much parallel to start with. You may need to adjust that later. And you don't tighten with the ball, you just tighten it, just hold in place. Then you put it with the snug portion and give a good torque there. And if you need to readjust it, don't use the ball. The ball is just for installation purposes, the ball end. Then you tighten it down. And now I can feel how that front derailleur, ooh, that's pretty smooth. Pew, 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 pew. Okay, onto the rear derailleur. But before the rear derailleur, we got to check that dropout. Is it aligned? That's when you use the dropout aligner tool. A DAG 3 or 2.2 is the one I have. It uses the rear wheel. So putting the rear wheel on here, it doesn't have to have the cassette, but the rear wheel needs to be true. Make sure you have it true and ready to go. Now tighten that bad boy up. Give it a, make sure the skewer, and make sure it's aligned. Very important. Make sure the wheel is in the dropouts flush, because you're using the wheel as the gauge marker. This is the DAG. There's a newer version of this. And also be careful if you have replaceable dropout hangers, they may snap. Some of the newer Treks, the alloy is so dainty that it'll pop. Some other brands will be the same, so you don't really want to muscle these too much. And you just basically have a measurement with this tool here and see where it lines. So I got more of a gap here. You just do a light tug. Now on steel frames or titanium frames, you don't need a lot of force. Plus this does not have a replaceable dropout, so you want to make sure that you're not overdoing it. Light and polite. Seems to be. There we go. And something like this vintage, you don't want to go too crazy. Not saying it's brittle or dainty or anything, but you know, it's one of those things. Once you have that derailleur hanger now, I know that's true position, so the derailleur itself has the opportunity of functioning correctly. So here's the rear derailleur. Pop down the hanger so it goes clear from the drop, and tighten that up in position. So now we wait for the cassette and chain But in the meantime, I can still cut the cables and thread those through for adjustments and get the front wheel on there and get her close as ready as I can. A couple of little things to look at. All right, so getting really close. Got the wheels on there. I'm going to show what I do as a trick on these little cable ends. Dropsies. So these have two different sides to them, and sometimes they look the same on either one, but if it has this flap bit, this is notched. So you can easily reach down while you're riding to tighten up that housing or type into the cable by lengthening the housing. Well, before you put these guys on, you want to put a little bit of grease on the actual posts themselves. What that does is protects the inside post from contaminants, water and i.e. dirt, and it makes these a heck of a lot easier to get off, because I've had situations where they've basically seized on there from all the dirt, and yeah, that's just not a good thing, because you're just like getting a screwdriver and you're prying. And well, I use tire levers. That's usually use these Pedro style tire levers, and you can kind of get a leverage. I use these for a lot of different things instead of fixing flats. I use the edges here to scrape off stickers and so forth. It has that nylon protective, and also prying things. Go try this first before you bust out any metal tools that may damage whatever you're trying to work with. So tighten these guys in, get both sides, and now the housing stops are ready for this particular one. Get that in there. Whew. Beautiful titanium, polished titanium frame. So there you go. And both of them are fluid with a little bit of lighted grease. That really makes it easy to do those adjustments while you're riding. So on to the cables and housing. That'll be the next step. String those up, get everything in place while I'm waiting for the cassette. And then when the cassette comes in again, do the chain and so forth. So when you're working on bikes like this, you can get quite a few little crazy nuances of the vintage pieces that you have to either retro adapt, like a 1-inch steer tube to 1.125". Those are kind of things, but there's a lot of adapters out there. They've been around there for a long time, so it shouldn't be too hard to come up with those particular pieces. Just need to know what you're looking for. And secondly, this does have the standard width of 130 drop spacing. Bottom bracket is the same with 3068 with threaded. So you'll still be able to get retro, and not retro, but you get newer parts to actually fit this retro frame. For this frame being 30 years old, still has a lot of, brake posts are the same positions, and so it's really not funky. It does have a one-piece housing for the brake, so you just use a little bit longer. There's no brake stops, and it has basically it's internal routed, which is kind of cool. A little shriek. And it is double butted. It has like a thinness in the top tube here, so it's double butted on both sides. Don't feel it so much. Well, there's a little bit on the down tube too. For that particular period of time, early 90s, I was pretty innovative. Also, there's a little bend here coming out that tightens up the rear wheel, so it gives you faster acceleration. So they push this out and then pushes the seat back, so it tucks that wheel underneath you a little bit more for acceleration. And titanium's property is a little forgiving, so it has a little flex to it, more so than aluminum. So therefore, you're trying to, with titanium, to find those particular designs and engineering to get that stiffness in areas that you want it back into the frame for acceleration. For the comfort of the titanium, the feel of steel is definitely there with this particular frame. A lot of tech put into these back in the day, and is it relevant? Absolutely. In addition to, these particular frames can still be worked and repaired on or changed with a titanium builder. Black Sheep in Fort Collins, Colorado, has done a couple of different retrofitting adjustments to a couple of frames of my customers, and they come in with the pieces and have me put it all together for them. It's kind of fun. But they actually can take, well, the last one was like a mountain bike converted to a cyclocross with 650B wheels, and they put it in a dismount and all those kinds of things. So they took an old titanium mountain bike frame and converted it to a cross bike. There's a few of those. There's several videos of those out there, so it's kind of fun. Anywho, yeah, just wanted to review what I do, the parts, when I install them. 100 different videos out there, including mine, how to do an adjustments and so forth. I just wanted to do a little feature on the parts on this particular titanium frame, and this is the kind of things that I have to work through and work with every day. And also these fancy bars, the housing goes in the frame, or the bar itself. So I'll have to string that through here and here. That takes a lot of thinking. And when you have stuff like that, take your time, because if you mess up once, that's hours later of restringing, especially for internal cable. I have a Klein video that shows the internal cable routings from Klein. You want to not mess up. Not specifically all Kleins, but for some Kleins, and that does carry over to a lot of the newer bikes with all the internal cable routing. So be mindful before you start diving in and pulling stuff out, because you maybe go, uh-oh, and that's going to cost you hours of your time to just do a simple 2-second thing. Anyhow, well, thank you for spending time with me in the garage, and check out some beautiful pictures of this completed.